All right. It is another exciting episode of Words About Books. But this one, I don't know. This one may be a words adjacent to books. I don't know which logo I'm going to use. But I'm not here with my co host, Nate. I'm here with a frequent guest of the show now, John Bierce. And John, do you want to introduce yourself for anyone who may have not heard the other episodes you've been in?
I am John Bierce, author of the Wizard School series Mage Errant, the plague novel The Rack. That Ben and Nate, they kind of like that one.
A award winner, yes.
And my new series, a Socialist Sword and Sorcery trilogy, More Gods and Stars. First book's The City That Would Eat the World. And I get really into 20th century megastructure architecture. It was all of the inspiration for that.
I only learned about that whole movement from from your book. So,
yes, I mean it's such a weird movement, but you've seen so much of it in so much media. Like we are just talking about Akira before we started recording. The design for Neo Tokyo is taken directly from the Metabolists, the Japanese megastructure architectural movement. Like their design for building in Tokyo Bay, that's just Neo Tokyo. It's just their design.
Yeah. That's actually really, I hadn't put that together until just now, actually. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's so many.
The cityscapes in Akira are some of the best in manga to this day.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that Midgard from Final Fantasy VII is taken from like a horribly bastardized version of another member of the Metabolists. I'm blanking out his name. I'm terrible at remembering names, even though they're not Japanese. But he was really big into artificial ground, right? Build another level of ground. For him, though, he wanted to have shops, industry, and stuff on the bottom, and then housing on top. He was very pro-nature, pro-people seeing the sky, like had a very humanist perspective in that way. Although weirdly, he was incredibly anti-democracy and pro-landlord. Right? He thought that landlords were the only one who... He was from like a family of predatory landlords.
Well, yeah, that'll color it.
Yeah. But he was very pro-nature, very pro-humanist, which is very weirdly, very strange politics, but kind of beautiful architectural vision. Like his personal house is like suspended up in the like 4 columns in the air. His like a little playroom was like hanging below it for the kids.
That's fascinating.
It's cool, yeah. But Midgard is kind of a flipped version of that, right? With people being forced underneath. And I can't prove that, but I would be shocked if someone on the team wasn't like reading his stuff.
I bet. No, because there's a whole. I've never fallen down this particular rabbit hole, but I've seen people who have of the weird Japanese architectural stuff when the economy really took off and they really thought they might be able to build just anything.
So much of it came from this little school of architects. There were, I think, 7 or 8 main ones, and maybe another that many again, kind of periphery members. But so much of media is inspired by their stuff, like Blade Runner. So much like the Blade Runner come from various versions of stuff.
I was going to say, there's so many versions of that Neo Tokyo. There's like the Hong Kong in Ghost in the Shell, and Blade Runner, of course. There's, I don't know. I could come up with a dozen examples. I don't even think this is what we're here to talk about today.
We're not, but it actually ties in with what we're here to talk about in a weird way.
Let's segue.
So one of the key, one of the big plot points of a lot of these, works of media with these megastructures is city of overpopulation, right? Numbers have gotten so huge that we need these giant arcology buildings to house the teeming billions. And that's what we're here to talk about today is overpopulation.
Yeah, and so
overpopulation fiction.
I think you were inspired to write this essay when we were talking about the Futurological Congress by Stanislaw Lem.
Yeah, I've been meaning to read Stanislaw Lem for forever, and I never read him before. And you guys got that. Like, okay, I'm going to jump on, read his stuff. I liked it a lot. But I also went and read his best known book, Solaris, which got
Mhm.
turned into two movies. One in 2004 with some big Hollywood guy at that time, and one in like the 70s from the Soviet Union.
See, this had all passed me by. I had honestly never heard of him until it showed up. Nate put it on the Words About Books poll, and that was the first time I'd encountered it. And I guess you're more tapped into the specifically this overpopulation point, because I thought it was almost quaint the way he viewed it. And I think he was writing in was it the 70s for this futurological comics?
60s, 70s. That was the heyday of
Yeah,
overpopulation fiction.
where like the world population was just growing with no sign of stopping. And I'm sitting here in 2025 and they're blaming, like you see the Pope blaming people with pets for not having children. And there's all this replacement narrative going on, and everybody wants you to have babies lest the teeming
Yeah,
masses replace us.
yeah, and I'll get into that a bit later on. Like, there's reasons for that shift and what happened, and I want to talk about both the history of the scientific idea and the history of it as fiction. But yeah, getting to actually meet a little essay I wrote.
Yeah.
I love overpopulation fiction because it's both dead and alive, simultaneously completely gutted in relevancy, and yet still meaningful and important. It's not dead for the obvious reasons, though. To explain why, though, we've got to go back centuries. Overpopulation fiction, to my mind, has two fathers, both 18th century British clergy. Not that fathers together.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. 18th century Britain would not approve of that. Overpopulation as a concept, as a specific prophecy of doom, started out with a guy named Thomas Robert Malthus, who predicted. You've heard.
Taking me back to my political philosophy 101 course. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's huge in political philosophy and economics and real sciences. Um, the To be clear, I am a big supporter of the social sciences as real science. Just economics is like usually more like interpretive dance.
The interpretive dance of the economy. I like that.
Yeah. No, there are some economists I love, but they're all like empirical economists. Malthus predicted something that got called the Malthusian overpopulation catastrophe, an event caused by birth rates overtaking agricultural output. He claimed that rather than using increasing agricultural output to improve standards of living, people will always instead use to have more kids, right? And that's always going to lead to growing beyond our means and then collapsing, right? But we could actually trace the origins to stylistic origins of overpopulation fiction back farther than Malthus, by most of a century, to the other father of the genre, a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Swift.
Of the Modest Proposal, gentlemen.
Yep. I mean, usually better known for Gulliver's Travels, but Modest Proposal is also pretty damn famous.
Something about eating Irish babies stuck in my head.
Use a toothpick. If it gets stuck in your,
If they just get stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. In 1729, Jonathan Swift published his famous essay, A Modest Proposal, which proposed solving Ireland's poverty crisis by having the Irish sell their children as food to the wealthy. Its satire, of course, targeted keenly at the English upper classes who were relentlessly hostile to the Irish poor, blaming them for their own struggles, whether they attributed it to the nature of the Irish, to their Catholicism, or whatever else. A Modest Proposal's dark, biting wit and satire is, once you compare it to most overpopulation fiction, pretty damn hard to avoid seeing echoes of everywhere. One of the two major veins of overpopulation fiction today is seriously, relentlessly weird, very much the tradition of Modest Proposal. Everyone who's read a classic overpopulation novel, like the Futurological Congress, has very likely run into bizarre prose, weird surrealist situations, and an air of general ridiculousness. It's not universally true, but it's stunningly common. This general trend extends to overpopulation fiction and other medium too. Most famous example is probably the movie Soylent Green, adapted from Harry Harrison's novel Make Room, Make Room. Other examples include Judge Dredd, Silent Running, Brave New World, and the Almost Peerless Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner, which is, in my opinion, one of the greatest novels of 20th century science fiction, except for the ending. The ending is terrible, one of the worst in science fiction, but the rest of the book is spectacular enough to make up for it. Like, honestly, I wish I could just cut off the last chapter and just give people copies.
Interesting. I have not read it, so I don't know. This could be spoilers.
Most of his books are these short, little, pulpy science fiction, and he's got 3 or 4 of these much longer, much more thoughtful, much higher quality works, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Stand on Zanzibar, The Sheep Look Up. Yeah, it's just like he's 2 different authors. He's just, I spit out a book about assassins on Mars, and then just like this brutal, heartfelt treatise on the base nature of reality and drugs.
Okay.
But getting aside, many of the greatest works of overpopulation fiction were part of or influenced by the new wave of science fiction, which focused heavily on experimental prose and narrative, influenced itself by surrealism, modernism, postmodernism, the new science of ecology, and the social upheaval of the 60s. Stanislaw Lem is one of the iconic names of the new wave, right? J.G. Ballard, or maybe Philip K. Dick could be arguably included in that, Ursula K. Le Guin. Basically, it's a list of people that Nate would either love or hate, with nothing in between. Like, Nate's going to feel strong about anything.
I was going to say, I've been hesitating to put Ursula Le Guin on the podcast because if Nate finds it as pretentious and weird as he finds Philip K. Dick, we're going to fight. I'm going to have to fight him.
You got to pick the right one. Like, I think if you start him off on Earthsea,
that's what I was thinking.
You guys could do the complete Earthsea, and like, I think he'd actually get it. Like, I think he'd kind of respect the whole her being more concerned with people hurting goats than people with dragons.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do it at this point because I think he's. I'm gonna say it because it popped into my head. I think he's dicked out. So I think between Android's Dream of Electric Sheep and Man in the High Castle, I think I've burned all my Philip K. Dick cred.
Yeah, I mean, don't tell them they went to the same high school.
No, I've been saving that.
Save it for if he loves. I mean, he'll probably hear it here. Anyway, yeah. So all these are very much part of the Swiftian tradition. Though, I'm kind of making this up. Right? This is not a formal thing in academia. This is me going, I'm going to pin it on these 2 guys.
You can use it if you're writing a book report, if you're a child in school and ChatGPT got a hold of the transcript for this. This is a primary source. It's the Swiftian tradition.
I mean, I once wrote a paper arguing that the Monkey Ridge Gang was pastoral romance. So, you can get away with whatever.
Did Jonathan have a similarly impactful Eras tour?
A similar impactful what?
Eras tour as the Swiftian tradition. You need to listen to more Taylor Swift. You need to have a baby sister like I do. Taylor, when you say Swiftian tradition, I immediately go to Taylor Swift because I'm surrounded by it.
Okay, I think we need to be very careful about the sentence, Swift advocated eating Irish babies. Like, if you just post that out of concept, I will get murdered within seconds by angry Swifties.
Yeah, or Donald Trump will tweet it because we're a primary source.
Okay.
I just heard Taylor Swift.
All right. The cold open to this episode needs to be Taylor Swift advocated eating Irish babies.
Isolated, clipped, done.
All right. It was nice knowing you. All right. But along with that Swiftian tradition and style, there's another one. One that follows in the path of Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus never wrote any fiction, but in 1798, Thomas Malthus released an essay on the principle of population, which made the aforementioned observation that human populations inevitably tend to use agricultural surplus to grow in size and increase the standards of living. This led to deeply pessimistic conclusions about human populations being doomed to overextended collapse and famine and suffering. Depressingly, Malthus's work ended up much more influential in the times than Swift's in actual public policy. Much of the Great Irish Famine can be attributed to ideas rising from Malthus, or more probably merely justified by Malthus's writings. Because here's the nasty corollary to Malthus' ideas. They were applied with incredible frequency to the poor, to colonized and enslaved peoples, and to anyone else low in the hierarchy of power structures.
Yeah, that was. It's been a long minute since I dealt with Malthus, but the way it was always presented to me was he was kind of looking around at the scene as it was and predicting just based on crop yields and population, like, and just graphing that and drawing a line and saying, eventually it collapses. He did not factor in any kind of improvements in agricultural output, or certainly, I think it would come as a shock. It seems like even in the 70s, maybe, that people do course correct when they have access to things like birth control and
Absolutely.
family planning resources and education.
Yeah, definitely going to bring some of that up later, too. But yeah, Malthus is surprisingly resistant to some of the arguments against him. It's just kind of in practice, it didn't really play out, right? I think Malthus' response to agricultural crop increases would always be, people will just breed faster. But we'll get to that. When Malthus' ideas were applied, they were never applied in university policy. They're applied in things like forced eugenic sterilization programs, used as justification for not providing food or economic aid during famines, like the aforementioned Great Irish Famine, or the even more lethal Great Indian Famine. Right? The British obviously were hugely into this. Malthus is one of their prodigal sons.
I actually hadn't heard about that. That Malthus, so they were using the justification, I guess, is that this is a natural balancing.
Yeah.
So we're not going to provide food because it would.
Or even that providing food would actually make things worse.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's a big historical question of how much the British actually believed those justifications. They were, after all, still enforcing food exports from maintaining exploitative taxation on these famine zones, bringing colossal profits to the empire while worsening people's starvation, right? This is a big part of why many of the Irish, even to this day, accuse it of the British Empire of performing a deliberate genocide, even though the people dying probably wasn't the goal. The profits was the goal.
It just wasn't a big concern.
Yeah, there's just a deep lack of concern for Irish life, and the Indian famine was just even more horrific and awful. Right? It's kind of a thing. When people find out Marxists, sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, what about all the people who died in the 20th century?" It's like capitalism never did that, and I'll just be like, "Do you know about the Great Indian Famine?"
I can guarantee they do not.
They do not.
Yeah.
And this kind of complicates the story. Famine is a pretty close to universal tool of and consequence of empire, right? Empires pretty much all use famine as a means of not only controlling dissident populations, but also forcing the populations to be subject in the first place, right? If there are alternatives to being part of the imperial core and monocropping to grow grain to support armies, subjects are just going to flee up into the hills and just subsistence farm where it's hard for the empire to reach, right? You can see this all over throughout world history, especially before the nation state spread completely across the Earth's surface, right? There's a fantastic book on it, a couple books on it by James C. Scott, Against the Grain and The Art of Not Being Governed. But right, they would basically inflict famine as a tool of social control, right? As a tool to make people want to be part of the empire in the first place. If they're burning the crops elsewhere, of course people have to come and be part of the empire because where else are they going to go? The one arguable counterexample of this I can think of offhand, the Incan Empire, still used starvation, except they were using it as a carrot, not a stick. They could essentially guarantee freedom from severe famine to its subjects through its highly sophisticated agricultural, logistical science, and technology. The Incans had incredibly advanced agricultural science. Like they famously had a huge scientific crop testing facility where they would like try breeding different things. They extended from the base of the mountains up to near the top, and at the different level and terraces, they'd grow crops designed for different altitudes and weather conditions. And different things. They invented freeze drying 400 years before the rest of the world. They had these giant warehouses up at the mountain tops where they would naturally freeze dry potatoes, and huge crop variety. They had logistical shipping. They had social instruction, or they had social systems built around feeding people. Like people owned their fields individually, but worked them communally. And always they had a specific order to the way the fields would be worked to help restore social balance. Like the empire's fields would be worked either first or last, I don't recall offhand. But the highest priority, apart from the empire, was widows with children. Old people. So they basically went in order of vulnerability, and land owned by strong, tough men, they'd be dead last because we're going to take all the vulnerable people first, right? And so they just could use this carrot, and this is a heavily disaster-prone, very marginal region Incan Empire is expending. But this is kind of the exception that proves the rule. They were offering freedom from famine, whereas everyone else is offering famine as a technique. And
And I'm just curious, is this stuff about the Incan Empire in the books you referenced?
No. So the stuff about the Incan Empire, I'm pulling from different books.
Because that's fascinating. This is legitimately the first time I'm hearing about Incan crop testing facilities, and that the terrace. I think I knew about terrace farming in Incan culture, but I did not realize they had used it to test things at different altitude, and I certainly didn't realize there was any freeze drying going on.
Oh yeah, no, it's hard to find good histories of the Incan Empire. I've only read a couple specific. Most of where I've read about this stuff comes from instead books of ecological history, like ecological world histories, or whatever, environmental history. I don't remember the titles of the books offhand. Right, they're in my collection, which is in a storage unit waiting to be shipped to Portugal.
If you find it, we'll put it in the description.
Yeah, I'll try and find it online or something. I used to read so many environmental. I still read them sometimes, but I went to a couple of years where I was reading like mostly environmental history. And they talk about the Incans so much because they're just such a fascinating history.
I didn't know we knew that much about them, truthfully, because my education on Native American cultures is pretty low. Like it was barely covered in even college, and then anything South American or even just Mexican is none. We didn't cover it at all.
If the Incans had a few hundred more years to expand on their own, like they either would have become the South American Roman Empire, or they just would have collapsed horribly because they were ultra centralized. They're already having trouble maintaining their giant temple city, so it's hard to say how it would have gone. But they were logistical masters. So they didn't build as many roads as quickly as the Romans did, but they were also building through much rougher, more difficult.
I was going to say it's a harder climate to maintain a road in.
Yeah, a lot more earthquakes.
And,
most of what people hear is just like, oh, they committed human sacrifice, and it's just bad.
Yeah, everybody.
But nothing on the scale of. Yeah, I mean, even the people talk about the Romans are like anti-human sacrifice, and then they're like, the burying of the Vestal Virgins, if they got laid, doesn't count for reasons. Crucifixion doesn't count for
I was going to say, well, we're not sacrificing it to a god. We just did that because it was fun.
Yeah.
So exactly. That's
or better. I've made some people very angry before about arguing that the Christian burning heretics and Jews at the stake was human sacrifice. They get very angry when I say that, but it's like, it's murder for religious reasons, guys.
It's, I mean, it might not technically be a burnt offering, but it's not good. I don't know. Maybe it would be better if it was, like if you actually thought it was doing something rather than just cruelty for cruelty's sake.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Human sacrifice is pretty awful, but we treat
isolated
it as
and clipped. I'll put it next to the Taylor Swift thing so that people know you're fair and balanced.
Perfect. Uh, yeah, I mean, people treat it as if it's like some uniquely bad way for a state to kill people. And that mostly comes from the Roman Empire's propaganda against uh, Carthage. You know,
Mm.
Carthage did it. Or was it the Etruscans? Maybe both. Um, anyhow, we're getting way off track now. Though.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm having fun talking about this stuff. I love moving with this. Right? But yeah, starvation goes intimately in with empire. You know, every empire from ancient days to modern uses starvation one or the other. The British used it. The Soviet Union, which is very much an empire, used it. You know, Imperial China used it. Communist China used it. Anyone who's read my books will know how I feel about empire. Not a big fan.
Yeah, no, you think it can work in certain circumstances, like with a giant wall. I think that's what I got from that one.
Yeah. Just build the wall.
Build
The walls will be.
the wall. Isolated and clipped. Yeah.
just make a clip show as the preview.
John Bierce caught. Fake communist.
Oh. Oh. And even with that complication of the way empire uses famine, it's hard to dismiss Malthusian reasoning as mere set dressing to these famines, right? Nor are the sterilization programs the only additional famines that went along, or the additional harms that went along with. Yeah, you know, it's remained a relentless tool for countless regressive and reactionary purposes since. The Malthusian reasoning has been used almost since day one to oppose foreign aid, poverty relief, any number of other social programs, claiming they'd merely make things worse for the disfavored group in question. Right? And it's never rich people. Right? Ideas and philosophies being used to justify greed is it's a depressingly common thing, right? Like it's half of all philosophy. The famed philosopher John Locke, for instance, argued stringently for private property rights, and specifically against the common property rights of Native Americans, under the grounds that they were not developing it, they were not using it, right? That it was terra nullius, right? Empty land, essentially, because they weren't enclosing it. You know, which enclosure has a very long history in English thought, right? It's a transition from common lands to privately owned ones. Big influence on City Beneath the World.
I was going to say, I feel like that particular line of argument is coming back a lot in the darker corners of the internet.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. But John Locke was all arguing about Native Americans not deserving property rights and all that stuff. He had already made huge fortunes from displacing Native Americans from their lands, and he went on to make even bigger fortunes from it. He was directly invested in the colonies. His philosophy arguing for private property and against the common rights of Native Americans was in his direct financial interests, right? It was just disingenuous, bare bones greed, right? And you find this again and again, right? I don't think Malthus was anywhere near as bad of a guy as John Locke, right? He's not one of history's greatest monsters. He's just like a British clergyman, kind of a nerd, right?
The vibe I got from Malthus, and I could be off. Now, this is, again, I'm going back to my college political philosophy course where it covered both of them. The vibe I get from Malthus is he's a numbers guy who doesn't have a lot of insight into the reality of the situation. And,
yeah, I'm not an expert in him.
And John Locke was expressly political. Like he was attempting to influence public opinion in a very specific way.
Absolutely. And that's kind of, I think that's a good distinction. Like the guy who invented statistics, I'm blanking his name, incredibly racist guy. Like he invented statistics in great part for racism purposes. The English. Right. But, Malthus had positive consequences too, right? He was a major influence on Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. When Charles Darwin left on the voyage for the Beagle, he had Malthus's book, he had Lyell's On the Principles of Geology, and Hutton's book on geology. Right, those are the three books he has: 2 geology texts and Malthus. Right, and I've also heard he might have had some of Alexander von Humboldt's stuff. He was hugely influenced by
Hmm.
Humboldt. But total aside, look up Alexander von Humboldt. He's so cool. He was the most famous man alive in the generation before Darwin. Like kings, emperors, Thomas Jefferson, all these people were like talking to him. Simon Bolivar, the guy who freed South America from Spain, basically. Please don't yell at me, people. I know that's an oversimplification. Was one of his students, and we've like almost forgotten Alexander von Humboldt today because of World War One. He was a German guy, and we like deleted Germany from a lot of our history. We don't talk about this German scientist was a huge influence on the founding fathers and friends to lots of them. Right. There's a freaking the Humboldt Current, Humboldt County, Humboldt Squid, all this name. Yeah. Humboldt Cradle Moon.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like with Malthus, he gets kind of like, maybe it even ropes into like the modern game theory type stuff, where I don't know if you ever read like Richard Dawkins, who is also annoying man.
I like to pretend only the first few years of his public career.
But he did used to make some sense, and they talk about game theory predicting evolution and predicting a gene-centric view of evolution. But I think the thing with Malthus, and it sounds like you're probably going somewhere with this, is the tendency to then separate a subset of humanity and treat only them like the animals, and the rest of us are still somehow above it and able to like dictate the environment.
You're basically describing the great chain of being, which is just, have you heard of that?
No.
It's this medieval idea, and you can see it represented in medieval art. Like, have you ever seen many medieval paintings? You know how there's like angels and God way up at top, and there'll be kings, and defeat the commoners, and then like maybe some animals, and then rocks and stuff. Right, it's this continual thing you'll see in medieval paintings a lot, and it directly derives from this idea of the great chain of being, a direct hierarchy of all life. God at the top, minerals at the bottom, animals leading, plants and animals leading up, and then of course it divides people, right? Usually in the feudal system. And it's stuck around to the present day. And they switch around who's on what level, but it's still around. Darwin did a lot of damage to it, but but Malthus, he influenced Darwin, economics, a lot of other fields. He's not a monster. Right? He's a nerd. He's caused both great damage and great benefit.
There's something to the notion that there is a finite pool of resources, and that at some point, if you grow beyond it, you will be cut back.
Well, yeah, but the problem is that's not what he's been used for. It's the powerful using it to justify exploiting the weak. And to a great extent, the psychology of the Malthusian ideas among the powerful can be explained by the concept of elite panic. It's best laid out in the brilliant nonfiction work of Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. The book explores how, during natural disasters and other type of crises, humans overwhelmingly become good actors. Everyone pitching in together to side as a group down to many of the worst criminals. Right? A great example is during Hurricane Katrina. There's all these stories about like murders and rapes in the Superdome. But what was actually going on in there is everyone's pitching in to work together. You had like gang members like carrying old ladies to get medical attention or water. There was one murder. And it was just like a fight that went bad. Right? Which is pretty astonishing for that many people crammed in that small space with that little food and water. But this again and again through disasters throughout history. Great San Francisco earthquake, after the 2004 tsunamis. Rebecca Solnit talks about all this, and it's just, like it's an instinct. Almost every human, someone's going to click in their brain, and they're going to become a good actor. There is one notable exception. One group that doesn't do this. You know who those are?
Probably the people who had the most.
Rich people.
Who have something to lose, like a status. With the great equalizer being a problem for them.
Right? They, to a great extent, the rich, and powerful require precarity. They require insecurity on the part of people below them in order to keep them in the hierarchy, right? If things break, go over the edge, this insecurity it doesn't matter anymore. There is no security to strive for. Right? Everything gets broken. And the rich they understand this on some level, or some more explicit than others. Um, and they tend to freak out, and they'll send in troops to regain control, often killing numerous survivors, often in horrifying numbers, like after the Great San Francisco Earthquake. You know, um, hundreds at the very least were murdered by troops being sent under fear of them being looters. A lot of them were just like gathering survival supplies, right? And you see this again and again and again during disasters. It's the elite freaking out. And it's very much the same sort of logic as with Malthusian, we shouldn't help the poor, right? The best explanation for this I've seen, again from Rick Sullivan, is the lack of social vulnerability the rich have. Most of us live precarious enough lives that we genuinely need each other, that we have to rely on friends, family, community, and strangers to survive day to day, let alone in crisis, right? Whereas the rich are separated enough from basic precarity that they're able to give themselves the illusion of independence and security, warping and weakening their ability to empathize with others. Elite panic is, to one degree or another, a major driving force behind all this Malthusian crisis overpopulation terror throughout history, right? It's not just a matter of they can profit from it, but it taps into like a genuine fear about staying on top. You can't even list how many of the people throughout history have been like, hey, the more you try to have, the more you're going to fear losing it, right? It was I think it's Taoist or Buddhist proverb. If you fill up a bowl all the way, it's going to spill. All these Malthusian ideas really dominate the other trend of population fiction, beside the Swiftian. This one's less satirical, surreal. It's more cynical, cruel, and biting, exploring the worst aspects of Malthusian overpopulation. It takes Malthus's vision dead seriously, making a genuine attempt to explore the consequences and causes of overpopulation. Often as the backstory for outward-facing space opera. Its exemplars often surpass the fame of the Swiftian school. Notable examples include the films Elysium and Avengers Infinity War, the anime Mobile Suit Gundam, the game Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, Marco Caluso's science fiction book series The Front Lines, which not as well known as the others, but it features Space Marines versus Kaiju. I love that. David Brin's novel Earth, and many, many others, right? The more serious tone of these doesn't always mean they're grimmer than the Swiftian school. Satire is often pretty damn grim, right? But they can be pretty dark. And I think this division, at least my made-up taxonomy, is the crux point of the fundamental questions of moral awareness the whole overpopulation idea wrestles with. How do humans surpass our base animal nature as a civilization? What do we owe our fellow humans? Is selfishness justified in survival? How do we balance the needs of civilization and nature? So on and so forth, right? And a simplistic reading of the two traditions have the Malthusian argument saying that, yes, humanity is doomed to overextend itself and smaller groups are justified putting their own survival first, while the Swiftian tradition would knowingly, mockingly point to the obscene and multiple senses of profits being made by the powerful in the name of Malthusian arguments, right? And there's some grain of truth to that understanding. Jonathan Swift was explicitly playing the role of jester, speaking truth to power and mocking elites to exploit the Irish. And his part of the tradition has often kept that up to some degree. And many of the more Malthusian overpopulation works seek to justify the selfishness of the elite, play a grimmer Professor Pangloss for exploitative social orders. Call of Duty, Infinite Warfare, I'm looking at you. Right, there's only some truth to such a simplistic depiction. There are a great many of the more Malthusian works that clearly don't think of the paths inevitable due to human nature, but rather inevitable due to the exploitative social systems that use the logic as justifications. They often hate and oppose logic, but they don't see a way to win against it, sans deus ex machina. Right? Cynical, but not Panglossian. Likewise, there are some more Swiftian works that clearly dismiss the effort to evade the overpopulation as useless, that in the end, they do justify the status quo, even through the satire. Right? This isn't arbitrary taxonomy. It's useful but fake, like all taxonomies. But the thing we had to come back to is overpopulation fiction is dead. It's dead, gone, and done because Malthus was wrong. Anyone who's been paying attention, the overpopulation crisis is over. Not going to happen. It's done. Population growth is stabilizing, or even reversing in many countries, and most experts believe that our global population will max out at 10 billion and change by the end of the century. Right? it turns out that under the right conditions, people will actually gravitate towards sustainable population sizes. In fact, according to a growing body of anthropological research, most forms of human organization throughout history and prehistory don't really have overpopulation as some sort of risk. Overpopulation risks are instead a product of a specific brand of sedentary agricultural civilization that's been carried over to industrial civilization, basically. Even during the utter heyday of overpopulation fiction in the 60s and 70s, it was basically beating its death throes, even if the authors didn't realize it. During the 1960s, the scientist Norman Borlaug pioneered the Green Revolution, which gave rise to crops and agricultural techniques that were better able to sustain a massive human population, badly damaging but not killing the foundation of Malthus's arguments. Borlaug and his compatriots unquestionably saved millions, if not billions, of lives over the decades since, and they grew the carrying capacity of the planet for humanity immensely. It wasn't all positive. There's some major environmental consequences, but for more, I highly, highly recommend Charles C. Mann's excellent book, The Wizard and the Prophet.
So maybe you're going into this, and I was hesitating to interrupt, but I'm wondering, like you mentioned, Infinity War, Avengers: Infinity War, where the Thanos snap, suddenly there's half the population and everything is solved. Like global warming is solved because we use half the resources. We meet all our carbon goals. Of course, there would be huge consequences to that are largely unacknowledged. But I kind of wonder then, does the overpopulation narrative still have some use in the overconsumption narrative?
Good question. And yeah, I'm absolutely going to go into that.
Okay.
It absolutely does. Right. You keep on presaging things I'm coming to later, and it's just like,
See, that's why I didn't want to interrupt, but I was like, it seemed, I just wanted to make sure it was going to happen.
Yeah, you've clearly thought about this stuff a lot, so yeah, for sure. Right. So despite Borlaug and the Green Revolution and all that stuff, or to go even earlier, Fritz Haber and the Haber-Bosch process of nitrogen fixing, which created nitrogen fertilizer, artificial nitrogen fertilizer, and likewise massively extended the human carrying capacity. Right. Technology was able to push us past a lot of the research generation stuff, though at terrible cost. Right. We've kind of wrecked the carrying capacity of the planet, and it's kind of teetering now. But despite these advancements, people didn't look at those and go, "Oh, problem solved." Right? The concerns only grew and grew in public, and they got tied up in everything from Cold War economics and foreign policy to welfare debates to the young environmental movement. Right? And that plays especially keenly into the whole discussion. During its youth, environmentalism was fairly nonpartisan, supported by conservatives and liberals alike, and it had its own very nasty, ugly, often eugenicist side with a deeply Malthusian streak. The whole public concern peaked with a runaway best-selling nonfiction book, The Population Bomb, published by Paul and Ann Ehrlich in 1968, which claimed that the population crisis would peak soon, leading to hundreds of millions more starving to death. Guess what date they gave for
that? The year 2000.
Nope. So this book was published in 1968. They predicted it for the 1970s.
Oh, okay.
They predicted, hundreds of millions, billions starving to death, utterly unavoidable crisis. A few years later, nothing happened. To this day, the Ehrlichs are still alive, and they still insist they were right. Maybe it's just off about some of the details and dates. But their books were a blunt, unoriginal echoing in classic Malthusian arguments, which had already started to face significant fire from scholars, not just for realms of the Green Revolution. It flopped. It failed. It took the wind out of much of the public perception of the overpopulation crisis, and it led to a lot of the downfall of overpopulation fiction. It's still around. It was still going for quite a while. It still pops up now, but those apocalyptic famines didn't happen, and it really crimped the overpopulation fiction to feel honest. But there's a more clever, subtle version of the logic of greed that came out about the same time in the much more respected writings of Garrett Hardin, the author of an essay one of the most widely cited essays around that you've probably heard of, called "The Tragedy of the Commons."
Mm-hmm.
You heard of that?
Yeah.
Garrett Hardin. It purports to prove that without private property, it is logically inevitable for humans to destroy any common resource. It proves this by completely ignoring an extensive global history of well-managed commons. There's no evidence in it. It's just an ideological rant. Right? Economist Eleanor Ostrom won a Nobel Prize in economics, which not a real Nobel, but still impressive, simply by spending her career seeking out empirical evidence that Garrett Hardin was talking out of his ass, and finding examples of managed commons that both succeeded and failed, seeking the principles that led to those outcomes. Right? Her book Governing Commons is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in how commons are managed. It's a bit of a dry read, but not too long.
Now, commons being like the common use land?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Right. The common pasture land or common irrigation water supplies or common forests, right? Like she has a whole section on how like Japanese villages in the mountains manage their forests, right? And there's all these cool little tricks to it. Like they don't try to stop cheating entirely. They instead, there's like clearly an allowable cheating. Right? They'll crack down hard when most people will try to sneak in and take wood early or extra water early. But if like, someone's, a widow's husband just died and they're struggling, they're going to look the other way while they're sneaking in the forest, right? And it's like an essential part of making these systems work. And there's all these little tricks to it like that. She builds like a consistent theory of how these succeed and fail, whether much older school commons or modern day like water management.
So is there, I wonder, is there like a pushback against the idea of common land because they're trying to say it's counter progress, like it's going back to a medieval.
Well, it goes back to John Locke,
Yeah.
who was arguing that, right, we're arguing in favor of private property, right? Going back to the British nobles who performed enclosure, took this common land away from the peasants and just put sheep on it instead. Right. And Garrett Hardin was absolutely part of this, right? His evidenceless ideological claim can be a lot better understood when you realize he's doing this to justify greed, capitalism, the private market, free trade, colonial exploitation, and also the fact that he was a vicious white supremacist. He showed his whole ass in 1974 with an essay called Lifeboat Ethics, the case against helping the poor.
Yeah, that's
do you hear the echoes from Indian famine, the Irish famine, Malthus, right?
I think
refusing to help.
Man, even back then though, they at least had like the common sense to like try to euphemize it a little.
Garrett Hardin, he did not hide his power level. Right? Yeah. Right. Among other things, the essay argued for resource hoarding, a complete end to immigration, and the end of food aid for the explicit goal of reducing the global population of poverty.
So is he in Trump's cabinet today, or?
He's dead now.
Damn. Because wow, that's the exact. That's the bullet points of the foreign policy there.
That's where you get. Yeah. No. He openly admits in Lifeboat Ethics, like, most of the folks I'm talking about here aren't white. He's very fine with that, right? I'm not being bold at all calling him white supremacist. Like many of his defenders call him that, right? And let alone his critics like the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? He is in many ways the peak and the culmination of old school overpopulation thought, and its final great defender in academia, right? For more on Garrett Hardin and on John Locke's disingenuous philosophy, among many other topics I've touched on here, I highly, highly recommend the brilliant Astor Taylor's book, Age of Insecurity. So you might have actually heard Astor Taylor before. Depending on your music taste.
Who Taylor?
Astor Taylor, the author of Age of Insecurity, I just mentioned. Have you ever listened to the band Neutral Milk Hotel?
Yes.
Her husband is in the band, and she's performed with them a few times.
Oh, okay.
Like, I think played accordion or something with them. I think her husband's the main songwriter. I can't remember. But she's really cool. She's like one of the premier like leftist academics around. She's Canadian. Highly recommend Age of Insecurity. She also wrote Democracy Isn't Real, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone.
That's how it feels.
What a great title.
Yeah.
I haven't read that one, but it's just a great title. Along with it, this is one of the books that most strongly influences me. Right. I'm referencing a lot here. Like there are books that influence essay I even mentioned. I'm bad about bibliographies.
If you have it, I'll put it in the description because I do think people will be interested.
Yeah, I'll try and write down a few of the books.
Yeah.
For your description. But despite the failure of the population bomb style mega crisis to manifest, and despite the entirely unempirical things of heart, we're obviously still facing severe ecological crises and resource shortages today. We're overusing fossil fuels, running out of arable topsoil, and draining the world's aquifers of fresh usable water. Hell, we're running out of sand. Sand, man. Right?
So I think the only way out of this crisis, and this is just me like using common sense here, is I need to green light several hundred miles of mini nuclear reactors owned and operated by Amazon to develop an advanced artificial intelligence that we can ask what we should do.
Yeah, just make sure some of the nuclear reactors on the moon.
Nope. And I'm gonna take a small town's fresh water to cool them.
Bonus points if it's in the Atacama Desert.
Yep.
I am very strongly in favor of taking colonized third world people's water away, right? To generate photos of pregnant Sonic the Hedgehog. Please put that.
That is what it.
Put that in the isolated clip.
Yeah,
show.
that is what it does. Nate wanted me to make a. I said like I don't know if this will be a bonus episode or what, and he's like make a trailer. It's writing itself. It might be one real trailer and then one trailer for the Patreon.
Nope, just only do the trailer of me saying offensive things.
John Bierce exposed. Hard-hitting interview.
Oh gosh, I'm doomed.
But yeah, I do wonder how they're going to spin this in the future, because the whole thing, it seems to be that you want to take a faceless mass of people and treat them like animals, and when things get tough, blame them, and we're going to need to make some cuts, so cut them. But as time goes on, and like I think they've tried this a lot with the carbon emissions. They've tried to they tried and I think failed to tell individuals, well, you just need to turn your air conditioning off.
The old individual responsibility.
Yeah, I think people have largely called bullshit on that. I don't think it's working this time around, but we'll see.
No. I mean, it was literally invented by the oil companies. Like,
yeah.
They were the ones who created all these sites. Like, what's your personal carbon emissions? Like, they built those websites and put them out there. Right? All those calculators for what's your carbon lifestyle? What's that? Right. And I've met so many like thoughtful, intelligent people who just keep talking about personal responsibility. It's just like, how am I going to be personally responsible for the fact that the U.S. military is the single biggest carbon emitter on the planet?
What are you going to...
And like, in fairness, I, John Bierce, author of Mage Errant, The Rack, and The City That Would Eat the World, am personally responsible for the U.S. Military's carbon emissions. But everyone else isn't.
Well, I would say there's certain things that I could say are on their face ridiculous. Like, I have heard of crypto miners refiring coal plants that had been closed simply to power crypto mining for coins that are going to be garbage and forgotten in 6 months. I mean, that's just, we can compromise on some things, I think, here.
Yeah. Oh God. But yeah, we're still running towards a crisis, but the human population is not the important variable. Rather, it's unsustainable resource use by a small portion of the population, the exact same proportion that uses resource crises and Malthusian arguments to argue specifically against helping the rest of the population, which isn't causing the problem in the first place, right? Sometimes I think neither the Malthusian nor the Swiftian traditions of overpopulation fiction are anywhere near cynical enough. Eh, There's still a path for overpopulation fiction to continue down. Death is hardly much of an obstacle for artistic movements, after all. Look at punk rock. Overpopulation fiction never stopped coming out. I doubt it ever will, even if overpopulation is not the problem we fear. We still do need to explore questions of global ecosystem polycrisis, elite panic, of resource overuse by exploitative capitalism. Right? The rise of birth rate obsessed fascism and religious movements across the world, as well as coming economic crises that will be triggered by declining populations, absolutely demand artistic exploration. We still need to explore questions of how we relate to one another and what do we owe our fellow humans. Questions of how do we survive and stay healthy in a sea of humanity. How do we deal with loss of individuality in a crowd, and so many more questions to be addressed through tropes and ideas of overpopulation fiction. The central question and conceit of overpopulation fiction may have been dead wrong, but being right isn't the purpose of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the end of my written part of my essay.
So yeah, then that I wanted to make sure before I jumped in with more questions, but it really does seem like the future of overpopulation fiction is, if it's going to be doing like good sci-fi, which is attempting to take current science fiction ideas and then project them a little far out. The speculative fiction, I guess, is like that that very simple game theory equation that Malthus came up with of like birth rate to food rate. That has now expanded in terms of variables to carbon emissions, ocean acidification, smog in the air, the amount of light refracted from the planet, all that stuff.
Resource use per capita, carrying capacity,
and I just think the calories thing, the calorie problem is largely solved. There might still be a distribution problem, but
the human race could not physically eat all the food that we produce every year. Right? We make too much food to eat. It's just not distributed even.
Yeah, no, but I was going to say I think the overpopulation fiction is kind of merging with I guess I would call it sustainability fiction. Like, I think maybe you're seeing more things like, well, let me ask you this. How does it connect into maybe the oil crisis fiction of like Dune or, I don't know, even like Avatar with their unobtainium? There's this one thing we need and we don't have a sustainable way to produce it. And we're just carrying on as if there's not a major problem on the horizon.
So I've got two answers to that. One is a really, really, really long answer, and the other one is really short. Which one do you want first?
We'll do the short and then the long.
The short version is, the Office meme where it shows you things, and they're the same picture.
The same picture, yep.
It's just that meme. That's the short answer. The longer answer is: you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave? Right?
Yeah.
So, for anyone listening who's not familiar, it's just you should be ashamed. This is philosophy 101.
You got to take your douche philosophy curriculum seriously. I keep sending you book lists.
Yeah. Sorry, but really, so the allegory of the cave is this idea: you're sitting in a cave, staring at the wall. There's a fire behind you, casting shadows, and you are trying to understand the shape of things by the shadows they cast. Right. All of these works you're talking about, Dune, Avatar, right? Ideas like Derek Hardin's or ideas like Eleanor Ostrom, right? things like the Great Chain of Being, Matthew's Note for Populations Crises, right? Marx's Reserve Army of Labor. All of these things are shadows of some core central idea to do with some fire that is it is some central idea, concept, understanding of how resources, hierarchy, and population stability and security interplay. Right? There is some innermost core way to conceptualize and describe this that humanity's greatest thinkers on the topic of civilization have been struggling at for literally millennia, and we've never been all able to get close to the truth. It's one of the core questions that I approach my own fiction, right? And, I'm tackling it both from, the paths of people that revolt me, who have these horrible ideas, exploitative ideas about it, and I'm also exploring it from the path of folks I adore, look up to, Eleanor Ostrom, Karl Marx, I definitely don't fantasize about me and Karl Marx having play dates and drinking tea and running around the woods, hand in hand, skipping. No, never.
No.
But
don't do fan art of it. Don't send it to John.
Absolutely. There's nothing I would hate more than fan art of me and my buddy Karl Marx
skipping through a field of flowers
with Engels looking on jealously in the background. Okay, Engels, he was actually a brilliant, important writer in his own, but I will just never get tired of all the letters Karl Marx sent him that were talking about something and they end with, "Oh, and please pay my rent."
Yeah.
Engels, my rent. Oh, yeah. But yeah, I mean, right? Like, I do think that Karl Marx came as close as anyone with his Reserve Army of Labor, right? This idea that capital has to discipline the rest of labor by keeping a certain section out of work, right? Not to exploit them for cheaper labor, but as a threat of, look, if you don't work, you're going to end up like these homeless folks, right? You're going to end up like these refugees. You're going to end up like these prisoners. And I think that gets to something really like a bald, ugly, naked truth to how hierarchy and resources and population works. But it's not the fire. It's not all the way there. Right? Every piece of art you named, every one of these philosophers and thinkers, they're trying to approach the same thing. I don't know if we can get there. I don't know if there's going to be some all-surpassing genius who will finally get to the heart of it. Maybe Chad Dingleton could turn his efforts onto it.
Yeah, with his erotic powers, he might just crack the case. The secret ingredient was love.
Chad Dingleton's the Zaphod Beeblebrox of philosophy.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that is the thing with the overpopulation fiction is it felt like the Futurological Congress felt cute because I'm sitting here in 2025 and our population, at least the people who look the way they want them to look, is declining. Like Japan wants more Japanese people. Trump wants more blonde people, though he keeps importing wives from elsewhere. So when somebody's like chastising you for not having more children, it's funny to hear somebody also complain about overpopulation. But at the same time, I think, yeah, it is like the whole sustainability, or it's like you said, like resource availability, I guess, fiction, the threat of scarcity of some kind, be it food or oil or spice or unobtainium. It's all I think you're right. It's all getting at that same thing. There's some universal truth, and it's always just going to keep evolving as we understand more the next thing we're super dependent on that we didn't realize we were super dependent on.
There's always going to be a resource bottleneck, right? There's always going to be one resource that's rarer than the rest that's going to become a choke point for us.
Yeah. Like until the heat death of the universe. Like, oh, we took stars for granted this whole time. What? We should have been making more.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's a tough one. Like it's one of those questions you can just keep battering away at for literally millennia. Um,
Do you think, like, I want to take the example of Infinity War because it's fairly recent, and I have talked to a lot of people who are like, "Well, Thanos has a point," and even in Infinity War, they don't do a great job of addressing, like, did Thanos actually make things better? When you brought people back, do you have a plan to deal with the crisis that was, I guess, legitimate and coming? Um, is that kind of like, is it irresponsible to use that as kind of like a half baked villain scheme? Like,
every utilitarian philosopher inevitably ends up a supervillain, right? So it works for actual supervillains, right? Like every time you find a utilitarian philosopher, you follow them for a while, they'll make a few good points for the first couple books, and then all of a sudden, out of left field, something horrible. Like
somebody
it's
needs to make the hard choice. It needs to
right.
be made.
Yeah, like look at Peter Singer, the philosopher who many people basically declare is responsible for the animal rights movement today, as we understand it, right? He comes up with utilitarian justifications, moral calculuses for, hey, we should not treat animals as badly. It's just like, yeah, yeah, cool, man. Right? Their idea is genuinely worth engaging with. They often get portrayed as the silly, over the top PETA stuff, but there are genuine, even at the most pragmatic, human centric levels, there are good arguments for animal rights. Like to reduce the risk of zoonotic diseases.
Mm.
Um, you know, from like factory farms. Parents should be allowed to execute their disabled kids. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just like, wait, hold up, what the fuck, Pete?
And they're not all hits, Pete.
Yeah, and there's this excellent article about a disabled disability studies writer who actually met him, went to dinner with him. He was polite and he was kind. He never like grabbed your wheelchair and pushed you. He was like, "Oh, would you like help with this? Can I do something?" He was just a perfect gentleman, right? And I was confused about that for a long time until I started reading more about how racism works, how Nazism and fascism work, and so on and so forth, and found that racists all have the one person of color they like, the good one, the exception,
Yeah.
right? The Nazis had to be very careful to not allow exceptions, and to not allow Nazis to get Jews out of the Holocaust, because they knew all of them would get out that way. Because every Nazi had the one Jew they liked,
Mm-hmm.
right? Hitler got a couple of Jews, his mom's doctor and his personal chauffeur, saved them from the Holocaust, right? He was allowed to do that because he was Hitler, obviously, but like they had to be very careful not to allow other Nazis to do that because they knew this is how, this is how bigotry works. Because there's always that exception, right? And this is, I think, the unrealistic thing about Thanos in Infinity War. He didn't have that exception, except maybe his daughters, but even then, he did sacrifice one of his daughters. So, spoilers for Avengers: Infinity War.
But yeah, I guess that was his thing. Is unlike the other attempts before, and they kind of don't examine this a ton, was that it was random. He
Mm-hmm.
he selected totally randomly. I guess somehow he configured the stones to be truly random, but
He was, I'm willing to. Like that's kind of the point where we're struggling a little bit. It's like, can these all-powerful magical stones actually reproduce random results?
As a math guy, I that is the hardest part for me to believe. But how? What's the seed of the generator that selects?
Oh,
But
yeah, we can always pretend to get Marvel nerdery. Like, so they come from the same past dead universe as Galactus. We can pretend it's just something from that universe that we can't access.
yeah,
Right? They got the seed from there, so that works well as a random seed.
yeah.
Um,
But
the,
the thing that got me with Thanos was it just didn't really engage with the question at all.
No, I
of
didn't.
what, why was it? I mean, obviously, you would say it was wrong for him to do what he did because you can see all the people who have lost loved ones and how they've been affected by it and all the suffering he's caused, and that's gut check bad. But how does he prevent the problem from just reoccurring again in a couple of years? How does he um, determine that we needed to reduce half of everything equally? Certainly not every living creature is equally responsible for whatever catastrophe, and like every planet has these problems and all this stuff. It I don't know. There's a couple of interesting elements to the overpopulation fiction that I'm starting to think about now. There's the resource itself that is in danger of being overconsumed. There's often an underclass of ignorant masses responsible for overconsuming it. Um, or,
Despite the fact in real life it's almost always the ultra wealthy.
yeah, I was going to say, or it's, I think with the modern oil analogs, there's the wealthy are hoarding it, but society's still built on it, and when it falls apart, it's still mostly the underclass that's going to suffer. Um, so yeah, I don't know. There's a couple of elements to it. It's going to be interesting to see how the genre evolves going forward, because I think increasingly you're going to have to move away from food or oil or simply one resource. There's so many variables, and it's not like you can just say, um, maybe I wonder is maybe I'm hopeful that the future of the resource fiction is the same as the future of the overpopulation food fiction, where I'll be looking back at this one day and think it's quaint that we thought we would never find alternative energy sources, and that we would.
I mean,
Yeah.
we found them. We just got to have to use them, right? We know all the individual solutions to these problems, most of them, and we can pretty sure we can find the rest. It's a political problem, scientific.
Yeah, that. So one of the interesting things I've thought about, and I've thought about it more as, I'm a person struggles with anxiety, and when my anxiety is under control, I am all for walkable cities and public transportation and everything. When my anxiety is not under control, I tend to over rely on my car. Um, but there are, going along with that, like the teeming masses, the underclass you don't want to engage with. Um, there's also that car centric thing of the ever looming threat. And you hear Trump talk about it with like public transportation and stuff. A lot of problems could be solved with increased uh, public transit, better trains, faster trains that go more places. Um, but nobody wants to interact with the pores. I don't want to sit on. Have you been on a city bus? Do you know what that experience is? I don't want to have that experience. I'd rather sit in my car for 40 minutes to go 5 miles.
I'm just going to say the buses here in Lisbon, they're fantastic. Like, not people from other European countries give them a lot of shit. Like, it's like bad coverage and they're slow or whatever.
come to Pennsylvania.
But compared to
Yeah.
America, it's like they're great. Um,
Does it go more
and the
than
buses
twice a
themselves are
day?
super
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, they go. They're super nice. They're big, comfy. They kind of remind me of Seattle's buses, long, multi-car buses. Just very comfortable to ride on.
But I think that there's something there. And I feel like I do this every time we talk. Is like I have like a million like baby connections form in the course of the conversation, and I can't concisely sum them up. But there's something there with what you said about um, the unemployed need to be kept around as a threat and a demonstration of what could happen to you. And it's
Mhm.
like I see them do that when we talk about car centric cities. Like one of the things I'm involved in my own local community is I uh, advocate for removing parking requirements for new buildings
Oh yeah.
so that you don't, like, if you have a new business in my neighborhood, you need to have parking for up to 6 cars. And that creates a huge problem where so much real estate has to be used for parking lots, whereas you could just like walk into the city or ride a bike. There's no need for that business to have 6 parking spaces for cars. Make it more inconvenient for cars. But then you will see the threat come from people of, oh, now I have to walk, or now I have to take a bus, now I have to ride a bike. Oh, why does my standard of living have to go down to accommodate? Because they see people who walk or ride a bike or ride a bus or take public transit as being inconvenienced by it.
We need to start portraying driving a car as a poor people thing. It's like, what? I have to transport myself?
You
How
drive
dare you?
your own car? Yeah. I have a bus driver do that.
I have a I have my own private train car, sir.
When you see that with rich people who keep designing pods, everything's got to be some dumbass pod.
Oh, the fucking pods.
They keep reinventing trains and buses over and over again with pods.
The Tech Bro train pods.
Yes.
Honestly, the whole Tide Pod shit a few years ago is a way less stupid pod craze than the Tech Bro pods.
Yeah, it's got to be a pod because it's got to be your own isolated space, because that's the threat. Is you would have to be with the rest of humanity, and that's a burden to be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and that's the threat in a lot of this fiction, is that you're just going to be tripping over people. You're just going to be like those people who have to live in the cities, not in the suburbs, and have to ride a bus. And like I said, I have to admit, I mean, like I said, when I have panic attacks, I drive. And that's, I mean, so I'm part of the problem, I guess, but
I'm not entirely anti-car, mostly anti-car, but like there's a time and a place, right? Like I enjoy being able to just call a taxi, right? Obviously, like we're not going to set up public transit for widely distributed rural areas. Right? There is a functioning role for individual transit, for individual vehicular transit, right? It's more about the role that cities play in transit. It's more about how we build, outline, and design these things, right? Like your point earlier about parking lots. If you look at a picture of a city 100-something years ago, 150 years ago, and then today, like an aerial picture, a picture from up high, you'll just see, just in the first picture, you'll see this incredible density. You just see all these awesome, like cool buildings and stuff. The modern picture, it's just like a desert of parking lots.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, even like New York City.
Yeah. And it's funny because I see in overpopulation fiction, it's like human beings, just the thought of having to be with a large number of human beings is horrific. Like that's what they're using to scare you. And it's like you said, but there are people today who simply have no choice but to engage with that. And that's the threat, is that you could be like them. Your current private transport and private community and all that, it's going to be given over to the masses. They're going to take it from you because there's not enough for everybody to have their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you engage with the overpopulation fiction, trying to put yourself in the author or the contemporary reader's shoes of actually believing and worrying that overpopulation crisis is a real threat, it hits really different. Like we'll never be able to fully put ourselves in those shoes. We know better, so it's kind of it's play acting. We can try, and when you do, it just hits so different. All of a sudden, the goofiness of the futurological Congress or like your mid room or whatever, it just all of a sudden it's just like, oh my god, this is dark humor. Holy shit, is this like? It's terrifying, kind of.
It's
Uh,
it's a struggle for me, like with the Futurological Congress, because the Futurological Congress really does dive into the Malthusian thing that people will continue to have children even if they have access to birth control and other options, simply because. Um, and I sit here as somebody with no children, and most of my friends who have children have one and are done. Um, it's I just don't see it. Like it doesn't even seem desirable. The fear could only be based in ignorance to me. Or like in Malthus's time, they didn't have access necessarily to those things. But um and then you get that utilitarian thing of, well, a certain amount of children were not meant to survive, and are you throwing off the balance by providing them with all these vaccines and stuff?
oh, yeah, yeah, good times. Um, right, and this, and this is something that I just keep coming back to in my own writing. Is It all plays into this idea of growth at all costs. Right? We have to keep the population increasing. At least of the right kind of people, whatever those people are for who's talking, right? And we're going to keep the economy growing. We got to keep. We're in a system entirely based around growth. Right? We talk about fears of overpopulation, and we've had all these things. This myth of overpopulation for so long. All these terrors about it, growth being too much, and yet our entire system was built around eternal growth.
Yeah, if it ever stops, we'll be in a recession.
Worse than that.
And my investments won't appreciate, and I cannot retire.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if we set out from the beginning to build an economic system built around stability, built around sufficiency, um, right, it would be real damn tough to do, but it's not impossible.
Yeah.
There have been societies that did it before, and when people say like, "Oh yeah, but those were like primitive hunter gatherers or something," it's like, so you're saying they're smarter than we are? Are you saying they're better educated? And we just can't match the achievements of
Well, but they didn't have a new iPhone every year. What's going to drive them to put a fourth camera on the phone, if not growth?
Yeah, I don't know. Um, those hunter gatherers, those barbarians, they had right to repair on their iPhones. You knew that. They let people repair their own smartphones in hunter gatherer society.
Again, it's the fear of having to talk to the people. If I didn't have an iPhone, I'd just have to live near everybody I like.
I had this experience when I was living in Vietnam. I had a pair of flip flops break. These were cheap $10 flip flops, right? Real cheap flip flops with $2, right? But it was $10 flip flops. Like I had them for a couple years, got good use out of them. The strap broke. And I was like, I'm gonna toss these ones. Can we go to the store and get new ones here soon? And my ex-wife was just, what? I was going to toss these. Can we go to them? She's like, no, you're not. And I was like, but it's like, we're taking them to the store and get those fit, or go to the shoe place and get them fixed for you. Do that? Like I was just like genuinely, it was like I thought there was only thing you could do for fancy shoes. I did not think you could like repair cheap rubber flip flops.
Yeah, no, you need
We did. I had them for another year and a half before they broke again.
But yeah, I think so many people that's the fear is having to get your shoes repaired is a retraction in your quality of life.
Yeah, you're supposed to be always buying new stuff.
Having to repairing things is for poor people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they would rather Thanos snap half of people out of existence.
Oh yeah,
if that's what it takes. There's something to it. I don't know. I don't know how we have the kind of lives we want to have without having this fear that's baked in. But I guess that is the thing. As long as you don't prioritize sustainability, then this lurking threat, there's just something in the back of your mind that knows it's there.
Yeah, and I mean that lurking threat, it's not a byproduct. It's one of the core mechanisms of capitalism, right? It's what Marx referred to as mute compulsion, um, right? It's what a lot of other thinkers have examined in different names, right? It's um, this desperation. It affects the poor. Like if you don't play by capitalism's rules, you don't eat.
Mm-hmm.
It affects the rich. If you don't play by capitalism's rules, and act as an enforcer, you lose your status, or you become one of the poor people whose actual lives are governed by mute compulsion in a much crueler way. Um, it's it's the game, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like yes, there's also just like the physical violence used to enforce it, but that mute compulsion of capitalism, that desperation is it's a rough one. Another book recommendation is actually just called Mute Compulsion by Soren Mao. Not MAO.
Soren Mao. I was going to say that is the most communist name I've ever heard.
He's like, I think he's like Swedish or Finnish, some Scandinavian country, but he's straight up a Marxist,
Yeah.
right? Like, he's like a wonderkind of, I think he's maybe younger than we are, and like,
Oh wow,
he's like the hot new thing in Marxism right now. Mute compulsion, it's like one of the most in-depth examinations of this Marxist idea that wasn't even examined heavily enough by Marx. It was kind of left aside of it. Random. By the way, please don't, with the list of me saying terrible things, please don't include the Peter Singer quote.
Fair enough.
That one's a bit too much. Yeah. The rest are clearly like a little bit funnier.
I'll only go the ones that are obviously weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think we've sort of hit on. Well, you tell me if you think we've sort of hit on what you mean by the overpopulation fiction is dead, but very much alive, in the sense that maybe the calorie-based overpopulation fiction is dead, but it's never going away as long as we are living unsustainably. We're always going to know.
In the ruins of Erlich, there lies Malthus, dead but dreaming. Yeah, Malthus Catan.
I think that's a good spot to end on, unless there's anything else you want to say.
No, I think that covers it.
Is there any, before we wrap up, is there any place on the internet people should check you out? Is there anything you would like to plug or recommend?
You can find links to all of my books at johnbierce.com. I have a Patreon where I publish monthly short stories, which will all be on book form eventually. So if you're not a big Patreon guy or gal, you can wait for that. My books are all out in ebook, audio, and paperback. There will be a Mage Errant webtoon comic.
Oh,
coming to the webtoon platform coming out hopefully soon. Hopefully, I have more news about that soon. And if you're already a fan of my books, you can join the fan community on Reddit at rmageerrant.
Awesome.
And my social medias are on my website and such.
All right. Well, I will try to include as many links in the description as we can for relevant material. And with that, I think we will end the episode.